Hey everybody! Painting roses in watercolor can be very challenging. In this video, I'm going to show you how to simplify a complex subject so that it's loose, bold, and expressive. Let's paint. Painting roses can be challenging. They're a very complicated subject. It's almost like painting some fabric that has a lot of folds. So what you have to do is you've got to just look at it and remember to simplify the shapes and really go with the gesture of the object. Your main goal is going to be to try and create some volume with your shapes, okay? So in this case, let's pretend that we've got our light coming this way and our shadow side is going to be on the left. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just block in some nice light sort of salmon-y pink tone on that right-hand side where I want it to be light, and I'm going to use a fair amount of water with that to make sure that my paint stays nice and light. Okay, and then as I start to move to the left side, which is my shadow side, I'm going to get a little bit darker. So I'm going to use a little bit more paint and a little bit less water, and I'm even going to throw, just the tiniest bit of some blue in with that, just to darken it up a little bit. And what I'll do is I'll start on my left side here, which is the shadow side, and I'll start putting in the darker paint, looking at the different folds and shapes that I see on the flower. Now I'm not trying to paint every single petal that I see. I want to get the major shapes in there, and I want to really get a sense of the light hitting the surface from this right-hand side. Okay, so then right in here, there's a little petal that sort of folds over. I want to get nice and dark underneath that. I want to get that nice spirally feeling of the center of the rose in there. And to do that, I'm going to drag my brush in the same direction that I see that spiral moving. So that's the whole thing about capturing gesture. You want to make sure that your paintings have a lot of motion and a lot of movement in them, because that's what will make people want to look at them for a longer period of time. Okay, we're going to let that dry, because right now it's all very wet. We can even just lift out a little teeny tiny bit of some of that paint in any areas where we might want to have a slightly slower transition, maybe get a little bit more light hitting some of the top of the flower. Okay, and then what we're going to do is next we're going to go and we're going to work with some of the foliage. And it's funny because a lot of times when people are painting any type of plants or flowers, all the attention goes to the flower itself, and there's a tendency maybe not to ignore the foliage, but to not put quite as much effort into it. And we're not going to do that because we want the leaves to look as believable as the rest of our flower. Okay, so we're going to start with some of the greens, and they're going to vary. Some of them are going to be lighter and warmer with a lot of yellow in them, and then other parts of it where it's in shadow are going to be darker, and they'll have a little bit more of our blue in them. As you know, blue and yellow are the way that we make green, and so when we want to darken things up, we can just throw a little bit more of that blue in there to make them a little darker. Now, when you make your leaves, try not to draw the outline of a leaf, okay? It doesn't look quite as natural. Instead, let your brush do all the work for you. Just take it, have a lot of contact with your paper, and then pull away as you get to the point. And if you're using a pointed round brush like I am, you'll get a beautiful sort of a gestural look that looks very natural and very much like an actual rose leaf looks. Okay, so let's get a little bit of that in there. And so now we have the basis for our drawing, and what we're going to be able to do at this point is start getting in a little bit of some background and getting a little bit more of maybe some suggestions of some other leaves that are sort of on the periphery or on the outside of our composition. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is really get some nice dark values to give us some contrast. Okay, and we're going to do that up at the top. Watch what happens when I put this really dark sort of grayish blue next to the edge of that rose. I don't want to touch it because if it touches where it's wet, it's going to run a little bit, but we're not going to worry about that if that happened over there. I'm going to take a little bit more water and I'm going to start to move the paint outwards so that it doesn't look like an outline around it. But what it does do is it just pops that contrast and makes things look so much bolder. Okay, so let's just get a little bit more of that on this side. Always remember to keep moving outwards from that bit of dark that you place next to your object. Okay, and then we're going to move down into here a little bit, get a little bit more dark. You're going to have to paint around some of those greens that you want to remain light. And we're going to get a little bit more into here. And that's going to give the whole rose a sense of some light hitting it, and it almost starts to pick up a little bit of a glow. Okay, let's get just a little bit more of that in here. I'm also going to just wipe my brush off a little bit, and I always just use my hand to do that, and just pull out a teeny tiny bit of some of that paint. Now if some of this blue gets on the left hand side, that's perfectly okay, because remember that left side is our shadow side, and we want that to have a little bit of depth and just sort of relate a little bit more to our background. So if you get a little bit of paint on your dark side that's from your background, that's perfectly okay. It'll actually make things hold together a little bit more. Okay, and then as we go down here, I'm going to use a little bit more of some of this dark to go in between some of my leaves. My paint is very wet, so it's running a lot. If you don't want your paint to run, what you're going to do is you're going to just wait a little bit longer in between the parts that you do for demo purposes, obviously. I don't want anyone to fall asleep, so I'm going to just keep moving with this, but if you wait until your paint is dry, it won't run. Okay, so there we go. We've got some nice hint of some of this foliage that's down here. What I like to always point out when it comes to the leaves is the fact that they're going to overlap, okay? It's not like we just have this stem with a rose head sitting at the end of it. What we want to have is we want to have all that nice fullness that we usually will have in a healthy plant, okay? So make sure you're not afraid to let things overlap. Even if they become a little bit ambiguous, that's perfectly okay. You don't want it to look like it's like a lollipop flower. You know what those look like. They're the kind that we used to draw when we were kids. So anyway, that's what we're going to do with that. And I just want to get a little teeny tiny bit more of some yellows in a few places. You can also just sort of throw some of that paint around just to kind of finish the thought and kind of tie it together compositionally. This edge here where it ran, if we want to clean that up, it's still a little bit wet, but if we go back and hit that when it's dry, it's going to just give us a little bit of a smoother edge on the left side where we have that shadow, and just sort of tie it together. And let's just do the same thing over here on the right so that we lose that halo that's around it. Okay, you always want it to look like it's a natural value, sort of a transition, as opposed to an outline. If we have an outline, it starts to look a little bit too much like a coloring book. Okay, and then also if you just pull that nice dark line of values right through the center of your composition, that will keep the viewer's eye moving right through it and just give you a nice sort of natural path to follow. Also notice too how I'm keeping my brush in contact with the paper. Always let your brush do the work for you. The more that you do things, make strokes like this, the streakier your painting is going to get. So always make sure you have enough paint on the brush, drag it through, and just don't be afraid to put it down. Okay? So have fun, practice. Do a whole bunch of them. Maybe even time yourself and see how much you can get done in a short amount of time, say maybe 5 minutes or 3 minutes. Don't get frustrated, keep it simple, and keep painting. Well, wasn't that easier than you thought it would be? Keep practicing, and if you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe. And also, let me know what you think in the comments below. I'll see you next time.